What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be taking a step away from the usual breakdown or tip videos, and I think it's time for another video just talking about the current state of Modern Warfare 2's multiplayer, and mainly just providing some more feedback and criticism on things that are still either broken or just not working properly, as well as things that are still straight up missing from the game. Now, many of these things are things that I have talked about in the past, so I will just be bringing those up again, but I think it is important to keep bringing this stuff up and keep pushing for change when it comes to this stuff. And that's where I have to have a very important disclaimer here. It seems like anytime I provide feedback these days, people just equate that to whining or complaining or just being overly negative about things. And all I want to say here is I bring this stuff up because I care about the game. I care about the franchise. I want it to be the best that it can be, and I think it's important to continue providing constructive feedback and criticism and to push for change where change is needed. With the things in today's video, I tried to focus on items that are not super subjective, like these are things that I think at least most players would agree with. But if you do disagree with anything, I'd love to hear your side of things. Instead of just calling me a whiner or a complainer, please let me know your perspective. Let me know why you disagree. I think that's a much more productive way to handle things. And diving right in, the first thing I want to talk about in this video that I feel has been lacking is communication from the developers. And that's a big reason that I'm even making this video in the first place, is so many of the things on this list, there's no acknowledgement of whatsoever, so we don't even know if we should be expecting any fixes or improvements in these areas. Now, it is worth noting they have a Trello board active for the game, but there's only a very small handful of issues that are being tracked on that, and most of them are fairly minor isolated bugs, not the actual big issues that are currently present in the game. So it would be really nice if we could get a whole lot more communication from the developers when it comes to a lot of these things, like as they pop up, as they become aware of them. It'd be great if they could add them to the Trello board as well as tweet them out at the very least. It's really frustrating to see almost complete silence when it comes to various elements of this game, especially so early on in its life cycle. Typically early on in a game's life cycle like this, they're working hard with a bunch of different patches and fixing a bunch of issues to get the game into a decent place going forward. And it would be nice to know what we have to look forward to, if anything at all. So that's the first thing. Communication, I think, would go a very long way at this point. Now let's dive into the actual in-game issues that I have on my list, keeping in mind these are in no particular order. The first one I've got here is just the general crashing and dev errors. This is one of the few areas where they have actually acknowledged this. It is on the Trello board. We've actually been seeing a few updates here or there as well that have apparently helped at least with certain specific issues and crashes. So I do have confidence that this is something that they are at least actively working on in the background, but it still needs to be brought up for a video like this because it is still a pretty big issue for a lot of players. Next, one of my biggest gameplay related issues with this game currently is the spawns. The spawns are just awful in this game. Like, I thought they were bad before Season 1, then with the Season 1 update, I feel like they got even worse. And while I have adapted to the spawn system and I am starting to figure out some patterns and stuff with it, I still feel like these spawns really hurt the potential of this game. The gameplay pacing and flow is just awful. And the maps, I think, feel so much worse than they actually are due to the fact that we have such a terrible spawn system in this game. Now, I don't want to get into too many details on spawns because there's a lot more to talk about in today's video, but I may make a dedicated video on this at some point in the near future, but I think I want to wait for the mid-season update first to see if they do make any adjustments. As for the next thing that is quite an important issue, but also somewhat expected within the launch window of a Call of Duty game, this is just the inconsistent connection experience. Some games, everything feels just fine, your shots are registering, it feels normal, everything feels good, and then other matches, it just feels like you're literally shooting marshmallows out of your gun. Now, I know some people will jump to the conclusion that this is like a skill-based damage algorithm or something in place, but when you actually count the number of hit markers, everything is still normal, it's just the hit detection itself feels terrible, or you feel like you're playing in the past and everybody else is playing in the present. Whatever it is that's causing this, it does need to be improved over time, and we do typically see that. I mean, even 10 years ago with Call of Duty, this is a very common complaint within the launch window, so I do expect it'll improve, but it needs to be brought up in this video. Next up, let's get into some more specifics. Something that would go a really long way with this game with how complex the Gunsmith and the tuning and stuff is: advanced stats in the Gunsmith. I really hope they are planning on bringing this in the future. Again, we haven't heard anything about this. There's no communication regarding this. But it just seems like such a massive step backwards to not have this in the game since we've had it for the past 3 years, and if anything, we need it now more than ever before due to the added complexity that they have with tuning and everything. On a similar note, and we're getting more into a wish list territory here, I'd really like to see some big firing range improvements. Now don't get me wrong, I'm at least happy that we have a firing range in the game, and I am getting some use out of it for sure. But having said that, I still feel like there's a lot of room for improvement here. Just a few things I'd like to see: better dummies, first off, that don't have gaps between their hitboxes, which can lead people to think that the hit detection is worse than it is. Second, it would be great if you had at least one dummy where you could fully control the distance that that dummy is away from you, so you can set the distance on that and do some proper testing there. And then finally, I'd love to see a proper recoil testing wall that really clearly displays bullet holes and that you can stand far enough back from. I know there's a door behind you in the firing range that some people use. That's not nearly good enough in my experience for proper recoil comparisons. So I'd love to see a wall that's dedicated for recoil plots, and ideally with a reset button as well, so you could press a button and clear the previous recoil plots. Those are just a few suggestions that I feel would go a really long way, but again, like I said, that's more of like a wish list item for the future, not so much a big issue with the game in its current state. After that, let's move on to Ghost and Suppressors. This is something that's really frustrating to see. In the game's current state, in case you weren't aware, if you're using the Ghost perk and it's currently activated, like you've charged it up, and you're also using a suppressor on your gun, you would think this would always keep you off the minimap as well as the compass. And while that is true when you directly fire your gun or with just regular UAV sweeps, the thing is, when you fire your gun with a suppressor, it will disable your Ghost perk for several seconds after you're finished firing, which means you will be showing up with UAV sweeps, even though you're not showing up for directly firing your gun. This I find to be really frustrating and counterintuitive. I mean, if you're making those trade-offs and those sacrifices to put a suppressor on your gun as well as the Ghost perk, you should be able to take full advantage of the benefits of those by always staying off the enemy's radar. In the game's current states, you can't do that, and I just feel like this limits playstyle variety, which also limits the depth and replayability of the game. The more available and supported playstyles, the better, in my opinion. Of course, you still need to do proper balancing between those playstyles, but that should be done with balanced trade-offs rather than just literally nerfing the playstyle across the board. Next up, let's talk a little bit about perks, and I'm not going to get too much into these subjective opinions. I really don't like the perk system. I hate perk packages. I hate the fact that you have to charge up your perks, but I'm not even really going to talk so much about that since that's more subjective. Instead, I want to just focus on the actual bugs or things that are missing with the perk system in its current state. The first thing is a bug where if you change perk packages midway through a game, it will always display your old perk package on the bottom. Like every time you respawn, for instance, those perks that appear on the bottom center of your screen, it will show the old perks that aren't actually active for you right now, and that can just be a little bit confusing for a lot of players. I've had a lot of people complaining about that. Just know I have done the testing with this. This is just a display error, so those aren't the actual active perks for you. But another thing is if they insist on maintaining a system where you have to charge up your perks over time throughout a match, there should absolutely be a method of checking that perk charge status at any time throughout a match. I think the best and most intuitive place for this would just be on the leaderboard screen. So if you pull up the leaderboard in the middle of a match, your perk charge status should just appear somewhere on that screen. You should always be able to have a quick peek to see what's currently charged, what isn't, and how close you are to charging up to your next perk. As for the next thing I want to talk about in this video, this is just unnecessarily slow animations in many cases. I'm primarily referring to calling in certain streaks, especially the ones where you pull out a smartphone and press a button on them, like UAVs and counter UAVs, for instance. This is just significantly slower than older Call of Duty games, and I find it just doesn't really make sense with the general pacing of a 6v6 match, and it just seems very unnecessary to be as slow as it is. I don't feel like this needs to be literally instant or anything like that, but in its current state, I just feel like it's very unnecessarily slow. After that, something that's missing, and I feel like this is something that everybody can agree on that should be in the game, this is the ability to save our custom blueprints or our custom gun builds with our custom tuning, for instance. That's something that we still don't have access to, and again, just like with the advanced stats in the Gunsmith, I feel like this is more necessary than ever before in Call of Duty, and yet we don't have it, whereas we had it in previous Call of Duty games. Especially when we're talking about tuning in here. There's so many little tiny adjustments you can make to things, and it's frustrating to have to do that or have to remember that or screenshot that or something in order to save that information for yourself to use at a later time. Next up, another thing that's still missing from the game, and this still blows my mind that it's missing from the game, we don't have a countdown for our double XP tokens when we activate them. Therefore, you're kind of left either guessing or you have to set a timer on your phone or something to let you know when that double XP runs out. Another big issue with this in its current state is you can activate multiple double XP tokens at the same time, therefore wasting them because they don't stack with each other. If you activate 2 double XP tokens at the same time, you don't get 4 times XP, you're only getting double XP, and that means you completely wasted the other one that you activated. And this just seems like a very basic oversight. The game shouldn't let you do that at all. Next up, another feature that we expect in every single Call of Duty game that still isn't in Modern Warfare 2, this is a proper after-action report. Now, they technically have something called an after-action report, but it's literally just the scoreboard from the previous match. I'm talking an after-action report that breaks down the XP that you earned, as well as the challenges that you've completed, the attachments you've unlocked, the camos you've unlocked in that game. This is yet another basic feature that is fully expected in a Call of Duty game that we don't have access to. Then I'm just going to bring up the UI in general. Still needs a lot of work in my opinion. It's not intuitive at all. We've got menus inside of menus that don't need to be there. They could all be on the same menu, but you have to activate a menu to get to another menu. We have to do a whole lot of horizontal scrolling when things could be displayed much more efficiently if they were displayed vertically. And I do feel like this is probably something they're working on the back end, because they did mention a long time ago that they would be reworking the UI. And I suspect that's something that they wouldn't just finish within a month. So they're probably still working on that in the back end. But we haven't heard any updated communication about that, so I'm at least going to bring it up in this video again. After that, there's a party issue where if you're partied up and you're not the host of that party and you're searching for a match or you're in the matchmaking queue, you can't edit your classes at all. The party host can edit their classes and do all that stuff, but anybody else in the party, they have no option of doing that, which is frustrating. Another thing that's more of a bug than anything, and I personally haven't experienced this yet, thankfully, but many people have, this is the fact that there are certain camos or certain weapon levels that you just can't seem to unlock. No matter what you do, it just doesn't unlock the ability to progress past that. And that's obviously frustrating if you're trying to grind for camos or just grind for levels on a particular gun. Next up on my list, what happened to the museum map? We had access to this in the beta, and from the looks of it, there were some legal issues surrounding this, and therefore they removed it from the game. But the main point I have here is, can we get some communication on this? Can we expect to see the museum map added at some point in the future? Is it going to be just a surprise and it shows up in the game one day? Or are they going to use it to pad their seasonal content drops that they're going to give to us to make it look like they're giving us more content, when in reality that was meant to be launch content that they actually advertised with the game and that we had access to in the beta? Just some communication on this would go a long way, especially due to the fact that we didn't get much 6v6 content. The 6v6 map count currently is very low, and it's already starting to get stale in my experience, even as somebody that doesn't grind this game every single day. I only play about 3 days a week, and I'm already starting to get burnt out on the limited number of maps we have access to. But then moving on to the next thing on my list, I made a whole video talking about this last week, but there's no hardcore game mode in the game. We have Tier 1, which is a totally different style of a game mode, and it just sucks that a staple feature that's always been in Call of Duty and that has a dedicated player base is just not there, and there's no word on if we can even expect this to come at some point in the future. And while I'm not much of a hardcore player myself outside of the odd camo challenge here or there, I still feel for the hardcore players out there, and it is really frustrating that they bought the game with the full expectation that they'd have these playlists that are always in Call of Duty, only to find out that they're not there and we don't even know if they're coming. And with that, there's one last thing I wanted to point out on my list here that isn't really going to apply to a lot of you. You may not care about it all that much, but at least for me, for the testing that I do for you guys, this would go a very long way. I'd love the ability to save custom game settings. We've had access to this in many previous Call of Duty games, and this is just something that would make my life a whole lot easier. But I also realize this probably shouldn't be a really high priority thing for them to work on, since it doesn't really affect the majority of the player base that doesn't even touch custom games. And with that, I forgot to mention their current implementation of skill-based matchmaking is terrible. I hate it. I'm not going to rant about it too much because I've done that enough over the years and they clearly don't care. And also, it would be nice if the lobbies wouldn't disband like they do. I still have yet to see a lobby stick together, even though they're supposed to sometimes. I've heard from some of my viewers that they have had some occasions where the lobbies won't disband, but for me, I have yet to see a lobby stick together, which is frustrating. And that is going to wrap it up for today's video. And this is where I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments down below. What else would you add to this list of things that still need to be worked out and fixed with Modern Warfare 2? What other big problems are you having, or what other features do you feel should be in the game that aren't currently in the game? If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.